Hey everybody, today I'd like to do a bit of a tactical moment for Musket and Tomahawks, the second video of this kind. This will be a little bit shorter, but I wanted to have a bit of a discussion of bows versus muskets and some of the advantages of each. But really, in order to do that, it's going to be a discussion on spotting, and so I'm going to kind of combine these two sort of topics together to have a little bit of a discussion of both. One of the things that becomes fairly apparent when you think about using natives with bows is that you don't have to reload, and so you're going to end up getting 4 shots per round, because on the native card you get 1 action, but you get 4 of these per round. And so unlike muskets, where you would spend 2 of them at a minimum if you're not moving, reloading, with these you could theoretically shoot 4 times if you were positioned well. This is attractive for folks, and it could be considered to be a very big advantage in some cases, depending on what you're trying to do. But I actually think that there's something that's even more significant in using bow weaponry versus muskets or black powder weaponry. And so what I've done here is I've set up a group of Ottawa on the left here, armed with bows, and then I have sort of an Iroquois war party, and I have the main party within 12 inches of the Ottawa. I have a single model charging in that's within 6 inches, and then I have a model with a gun out at 18 inches, just to show really what the spotting function within Musket and Tomahawks looks like, and how that specifically affects natives within terrain and in this discussion with bows. And so when looking at the spotting chart, well, I guess I should say the spotting mechanic isn't the same thing as line of sight, and so you do have to have line of sight in Musket and Tomahawks, but you can have line of sight but still not be able to target an enemy. Musket and Tomahawks utilizes the spotting mechanic, which takes things into account such as terrain and weather and smoke and various things to determine whether you can actually see your enemy over a distance, regardless of the line of sight between the 2 models. I think that this is a really nice mechanic. It's not something that I've experienced in this way in any other game, and it's one of the attractive elements of Musket and Tomahawks. Now, the spotting chart has a number of columns, and it's first differentiated between whether you're in fully open terrain, light cover, or dense or heavy cover. In this case, the woods would be considered dense or heavy cover. You'll see that there's a shaded column, and that's sort of your starting baseline value, regardless of modifiers that will then be applied later. If you look at the column on the right, the dense or heavy cover has 18 inches as your baseline, which is quite significantly different compared to 96 inches of open terrain. So right off the bat, we have essentially 18 inches between our model here on the right, that's the sort of lone Indian model right here, and then our Ottawa with bows on the left side of the screen. So that is, they are within that 18 inches. If all things being equal, if there were no modifiers, even through this terrain based on this chart, they could shoot each other all within that range. Now, that isn't the case because there are modifiers that are going to be applied. If we actually look at that sharpshooter all the way on the right-hand side, and then we go down the modifier chart, right now, with since the folks with the bows on the left can't actually generate a black powder marker because they're using bows, it's going to remain 18. Because they're actually natives, or irregular, but in this case natives, you move 1 column to the left. It says -1, and so that 18 becomes 12 inches. So right off the bat, because we're firing at natives, that guy all the way on the right would not be able to fire upon them. Then we have weather and terrain. Now, in this case, we're assuming a clear day, but if the line of sight between the spotter and the figure crosses 6 inches or more of dense cover, then you actually move again 1 more column, so that 12 inches actually becomes 8 inches in this case, because there is 6 inches, easily between those two models on each side of the screen. So really, the Ottawa with the bows and that shooter on the right can't right now actually fire at each other. If that shooter on the right at 18 inches, because he is also he is a native and crosses that terrain, he's at 8 inches. But once that model fires, regardless of the damage he does and the outcome, once a black powder marker is put there, now that 8 inches goes back up to 18 inches. And now, theoretically speaking, the natives could actually fire at that model. And so that black powder marker is extremely significant. And the bows, even though they can't, even though they can't generate that black powder marker themselves, they are actually able to fire, and range of bows is up to 24 inches. They could theoretically fire now, just having had that black powder marker generated. Now, so with the Iroquois War Party in the center of the table here, at within 12 inches of the Ottawa with bows, we would still be in denser heavy cover, and so we're looking at 18 inches as our baseline measurement. Now, Ottawa with the bows are, of course, natives within dense terrain, and so that immediately goes to 12 inches. And then from there, they are still crossing 6 inches or more of dense cover, and so then that goes down to 8 inches. And so at this point in time, the guns, the Iroquois with the guns would not be able to fire upon the Ottawa with the bows because they're still too far out given those advantages. Now, in reverse, the same thing applies. 8 inches is still too far out with the bows to be able to fire upon them. But once this unit fires, now that 8 inches jumps up to 18 because of the addition of a black powder marker. And then now the bows actually would be able to fire upon them. And in this case, because they're within 12 inches, if we were to discuss more aspects of shooting, the bows would have a better chance of killing them because they do get some penalties at long range, like in the previous example. Now, when we discuss the last situation here, we have a model that's within 6 inches of the Ottawa with bows. Now, that model, could be looking to charge in, to throw hand weapons, to do lots of things, but it's got a musket. Let's just assume, to keep continuity with the example, that it wanted to fire upon the natives with bows, the Ottawa with the bows. Now, I believe we're sitting at about 5 inches when I measured it. We're starting with a baseline of 18 inches of sight because we're in denser heavy cover. And so that's perfectly fine because we're within that amount. Now it goes down to 12 because the Ottawa are natives within terrain, dense terrain. And in this case, to be actually a bit more clear, it's actually not because they're in dense terrain, it's just because they're an Indian or an irregular. Just a bit of a correction. And so because of that, it goes from 18 to 12. And in this case, there is no line of sight between the spotter and the figure to spot that's 6 inches or more because we're within a shorter distance. So in this case, that model could fire no problem. And that's just because whether there's no black powder marker issue here or not, even in the reverse situation, because now the Ottawa really have the same advantage. Whether that model fires or not, it would actually reduce it even further. If the Ottawa were firing with bows on that native after a black powder marker, essentially we're looking at 18 inches going down to 12 because it's a native. There is no additional amount because there's no 6 inches of dense cover between them. But then it goes up to 24, because of the black powder marker. And so, yeah, 2 columns to the right. And so, one of the things that I hope you'd appreciate in this case is that the black powder marker has made a tremendous difference. Now, granted, it is after the first shot, but oftentimes we do see multiple shots and engagements in musket and tomahawks. And so, it can make a really, really big difference. You're, in some ways, one of the best things about utilizing natives in the game is their ability to utilize cover and also to avoid being spotted. And so the moment they pick up a musket and then they fire, they lose a lot of that. And the bow will allow you to not only continually fire without reloading, it also allows you to not become spotted nearly as easy. And so you effectively can't be targeted by fire. Now, the one thing I'm not focusing on attack rolls and things like that today, but bows are definitely less lethal once you do get a hit, and so you do need the baseline value of 5s to actually cause a kill, whereas you need 3s with a musket. And so that definitely is something to take in consideration. And then bows definitely do become less lethal at a distance as well. And so they do have, limitations as compared to musket weaponry. But I wanted to just give a little bit of an appreciation for how you can take natives with bows in the game and utilize them in a mix within either a mixed force or a native force, complete native force, and either mixing it up with units that are utilizing muskets or rifles, or just using all bows is a possibility as well. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video and interested in your comments and thoughts. Talk to you later.